Welcome, wanderer of the night, to Bedtime's sleepy historian, a quiet corner of YouTube where the past is told not in battles and noise, but in whispers and candlelight. Here, we drift through forgotten tales of emperors and peasants, monks and sailors, queens and thieves, always slow, always gentle, so that history feels less like a lecture and more like a dream. Each story is crafted to help you unwind, to let your mind rest among old libraries, medieval cloisters, bustling Roman streets, or silent palaces where ghosts still walk. So close your eyes, set aside the day's worries, and listen. History is waiting to lull you into sleep. If you enjoy drifting through time with me, don't forget to subscribe and let the echoes of the past keep you company, night after night. The price of power on four hooves. The clatter of hooves echoed through the narrow street of Rouen as dawn spilled pale light over the rooftops. Merchants were only just rolling up the shutters of their stalls, and bakers were pulling loaves, golden and steaming, from their ovens. Yet one man walked with the heavy purpose of someone not out for bread or cloth, but for power. His name was Arnaud, a minor knight whose family held little more than a patch of land and a tower on the edge of Normandy. Arnaud's fortunes, like those of so many young men of his station, depended not only on his sword but on what carried him into battle. A knight without a war horse was hardly a knight at all, more like an armored man waiting to be trampled. His gelding, a sturdy brown beast named Cendra, had served him well in training and small skirmishes, but it was no destrier. A destrier, the great war horse, the thundering pride of tournaments and crusades, was what marked true status. Its value could equal that of land, livestock, even a modest estate. So Arnaud found himself at the horse market, where the air smelled of hay, sweat, and coins being counted. Traders shouted prices, boasting of their animals' lineage. From the stock of Artois. Strong shoulders, perfect for charging the Saracen line. Another tapped the flanks of a dappled mare, promising she had carried a baron himself into battle. The truth was simpler. A true war horse cost dearly. A palfrey, fit for travel, might be bought for a few pounds sterling. A rouncy, a serviceable mount for squires or lighter soldiers, perhaps a little more. But a destrier, the kind Arnaud longed for, could demand 30, 40, even 60 pounds, a sum that might bankrupt a modest family. For perspective, a common laborer might work an entire year for barely 2 pounds. Arnaud stood at the edge of the stalls, fingers worrying the purse at his belt. Inside was the fruit of 3 years of saving, small gifts from his liege lord, and the dowry portion his late father had left behind. Enough, perhaps, for a rouncy, or even a decent courser if luck smiled on him. But was it enough to buy not only a horse, but a future? Behind him, the sound of iron shoes striking the cobblestones grew louder. He turned to see a group of wealthier knights arriving, their own mounts adorned with tooled leather bridles and crests. They carried themselves with the ease of men whose families could afford destriers as easily as others bought bread. They laughed, gestured, and already the traders scrambled to bring out their finest beasts. Arnaud's heart tightened. This was the reality of the medieval world. The cost of a horse could decide whether a man remained obscure, or rose to glory. And in that moment, beneath the morning sun and the cries of merchants, he realized that what he was really bargaining for was not an animal, but a place in history. Bargains and sacrifices. Arnaud stepped deeper into the rows of stalls, the ground beneath him littered with straw and hoofprints. The air was full of snorts, whinnies, and the sharp crack of whips used to make the horses trot for potential buyers. Traders moved like hawks, swooping on those whose purses looked heavy. Arnaud tried to look casual, but the way he clutched his belt betrayed him. A tall man with a scar down his cheek appeared at his side. His tunic was patched, but his eyes gleamed with the sharpness of one who lived by barter. "You're in the market for something more than a pack mule," he said, his voice low. I can tell by your shoulders you've worn mail, aye? Arnaud stiffened, but gave a curt nod. A mount fit for the lists, he said, testing the words. The man grinned. A destrier, then. Come. He led him to a pen at the far end, where 3 horses stood apart from the rest. These were not the plodding rounceys nor the elegant palfreys. These animals were taller, broader in the chest, with thick necks and eyes that flashed with fire. One pawed the earth, ears pinned back as if daring the world to challenge it. Arnaud's breath caught. He could imagine it already, the thundering charge, the tilt of the lance, the shudder as impact shook both rider and beast. It was as though he had stepped into a dream. The traitor leaned close. This one, he said, patting the flank of a black stallion, is out of Flemish stock. Stronger than 10 men, trained to bite and kick as well as charge. Price is fair, £50 sterling. Arnaud almost laughed. £50. He might as well have been asked for a castle. His purse carried barely a tenth of that. The traitor must have seen the shadow cross his face, for he dropped his voice again. Not all knights pay in coin. Some pay in service. Some in favors. A horse may be pledged, as a knight himself is pledged, until the debt is settled. Arnaud frowned. It was true, horses were so costly that men often entered complicated arrangements. Lords lent destriers to their retainers, expecting loyalty in return. Sometimes even monasteries owned war horses, leasing them to knights who promised gifts to the church. A knight who fell in battle might leave his mount to his patron rather than his kin. Still, the thought of indebting himself gnawed at him. To bind himself too tightly was to risk becoming little more than another man's shadow. Yet what choice did he have? Without a war horse, he could never advance. Without advancement, his family's name would fade into obscurity. The stallion pawed again, shaking its mane, and Arnaud felt its heat radiate through the morning air. A creature like this could change his destiny. But the cost, oh, the cost was more than silver. It was freedom. Behind him, the wealthier knights laughed again as they made their selections, their purses jingling without care. Arnaud closed his hand around his own meager coins. He was not ready to answer the traitor, not yet. He needed time, and perhaps a miracle. And so, with the destrier's gaze burning in his mind, Arnaud turned back into the market, seeking a path between what he longed for and what he could afford. The lesser steeds? The market stretched longer than Arnaud first imagined, rows of pens disappearing into the haze of dust and sunlight. Beyond the destrier stood humbler creatures, horses of mixed breeds, lighter of bone, more patient in the eye. These were the rounceys, the everyday mounts of men who needed speed and endurance more than brute power. A grizzled traitor with a pipe in his teeth beckoned him over. "You're staring too high, lad," he said, squinting at Arnaud's armor, which bore the dents of past scuffles but none of the polish of wealth. "Come look at these, good rounceys, hardy on long marches, won't throw you when the trumpets sound." Arnaud stroked the nose of a chestnut mare, her breath warm against his palm. She lacked the imposing stature of a destrier, yet there was a gentleness about her. A rouncey could be bought for £6 or £7, perhaps 10 if she had good training. That was within reach. But he remembered the words of his uncle. A knight is measured not only by his courage but by the horse he rides. Arrive on a rouncey, and they'll call you servant. Arrive on a destrier, and they'll call you lord. The traitor seemed to read his thoughts. You want glory, I can tell. But listen well, half the men who charge into battle on destriers don't live long enough to boast of it. A courser will do you more good. Fast, strong, not so temperamental. He led Arnaud further down to where the coursers stood, leaner than destriers, built for speed and stamina. These were prized on campaigns, cheaper than destriers yet costly still, perhaps 15 to 20 pounds. Enough to empty Arnaud's purse and leave nothing for repairs, armor, or provisions. Arnaud lingered. He could almost imagine himself astride one of these coursers, spear leveled, cloak snapping in the wind. It was a compromise, a step above the humble rouncy, though short of the destrier's grandeur. As he weighed the choice, a voice rang out from behind. "A man who hesitates loses the field." Arnaud turned. A knight older than himself, with silver streaking his beard, stood there. His horse, a grey courser, watched with calm, intelligent eyes. The knight's surcoat bore stains of travel and rusted edges, but his bearing was proud. "You're shopping for your fortune," the man said simply. "Every knight does. But fortune comes at different prices. My first horse cost me £3 and a broken oath. I fought on that beast for 7 years until it dropped dead beneath me. My second, a courser, I bought with coin and kept my honor intact. Decide which you'd rather pay with, your silver or your soul." Arnaud opened his mouth, but the knight was already moving on, leaving him with the weight of those words. He looked again at the rouncy, then at the courser, and finally, in his mind's eye, back at the proud black destrier. Each horse was a path. Each demanded a toll. And though his purse held only coins, he felt as though it was his very life that was being measured on the scales. Lords, kings, and the horse trade. Arnaud's indecision carried him out of the stables and into the square beyond, where banners hung from poles and a small crowd gathered around a herald. The man's voice carried over the din of the market, proclaiming new edicts from Duke William's court. Taxes on wool, levies for roads, and Arnaud's ears pricked at this, restrictions on the export of horses. "By order of the Duke," the herald cried, "no destrier bred in Normandy shall be sold beyond the realm, save by license of his lordship. Any knight seeking purchase must swear loyalty to a recognized liege, who shall vouchsafe his standing." The crowd murmured. Arnaud felt the words strike like hammer blows. Horses were not mere livestock, they were currency in the economy of power. A destrier was not just bought with coin, it was granted, allowed, often bestowed as a gift to bind men tighter to their lords. Kings and dukes knew well that whoever controlled the horses controlled the charge of knights, and thus the outcome of battles. He thought again of the trader's offer, payment by service, not silver. It was the same principle. To own a destrier was to owe a man something. Even the wealthiest knights carried that chain, gilded though it might be. A parchment nailed to a nearby post caught his eye. It listed rewards for knights who pledged service on campaign, 10 marks for each man-at-arms brought, 30 marks for each destrier provided, and double rations. It was a clear message. Those with horses were courted, rewarded, treated as the backbone of the host. Those without were little more than foot soldiers in armor. Arnaud ran a hand across his jaw. He had thought of the horse as a beast to buy, but it was more than that. It was a seal of legitimacy. Without one, he would never be seen as a true knight, no matter how sharp his blade. Nearby, 2 squires argued over the price of fodder. "Barley's doubled again," one complained. "The Duke's men are buying up every sack to feed the cavalry. Even if we had the coin for a horse, how would we keep it fed?" The second squire spat into the dust. "That's the trick, isn't it? A destrier eats like 3 men. Costs more to stable than to shoe. They say King Henry himself spends more on his horses each year than on his castles." Arnaud turned away. The truth of it deepened the pit in his stomach. To buy a war horse was only the beginning. To keep it alive and trained was another fortune entirely. Hay, oats, grooms, farriers, saddles, harness, all bled coin from a knight's purse like a wound that never healed. Still, as he looked across the square and saw the wealthier knights leading their new mounts away, sunlight glinting on polished tack, he felt the tug of destiny. He could not shake the conviction that without a horse worthy of battle, his own story would never be told. He drew a long breath. If coin would not buy him a future, then perhaps loyalty would. The question was, whose banner would he tie himself to in exchange for a mount? The weight of patronage. By late afternoon, the market was thinning. Dust clung to Arnaud's boots, and the jingling of coins around him grew rarer. Most purses were already emptied, most deals struck. He stood at the edge of the square, watching the procession of wealthier knights leading their horses home. Some destriers wore embroidered caparisons, others plain leather tack, but all radiated a power that made Arnaud's chest ache with longing. He knew now what he must do. Alone, his purse would never stretch to a destrier. But in this world, coin was not the only currency. Service, loyalty, blood, these too were traded. Across the square, beneath a striped canopy, sat Lord Giafar of Montevilliers, a man whose reputation was carved in both battlefields and tavern tales. He was not a duke, nor even a baron of the first rank, but his retinue of men-at-arms and the sheen of his armor marked him as wealthy. More importantly, he was known to be recruiting riders for the duke's next campaign. Arnaud approached with steady steps, though his heart thudded like a drum. Giafar looked up from a goblet of wine, his eyes narrowing as they took in the young knight's patched surcoat and worn boots. "You're not here to sell wool," Giafar said flatly. "No, my lord," Arnaud replied, bowing low. "I come to offer service. I seek a mount worthy of the field, and I am told you reward loyalty." The lord's lips curved into something between amusement and scorn. "Ah! Another eager hawk with no wings. Tell me, boy, why should I spend £40 to give you a destrier, when I could buy 2 more men-at-arms instead?" Arnaud swallowed hard. He had no lineage to boast, no lands worth naming. Only his own courage, sharpened in small skirmishes that few remembered. He forced his voice steady. "Because I will not waste what you give. I swear by my sword and my soul that if you trust me with such a mount, I will ride at your word until my breath is gone." For a long moment Giafar studied him. Then he laughed, not cruelly but with the sharpness of one who enjoyed testing men. "Fine words. But loyalty is proven in service, not oaths. If you would have my horse, you must earn it. Serve me on campaign. Bring me honor and plunder, and perhaps then I will think you worth the saddle of a destrier." Arnaud's heart both lifted and sank. It was not a no, but neither was it a yes. It was a chain of obligation, iron wrapped in velvet. He bowed again. "Then I will serve." Giafar waved to a groom, who brought forward a plain but sturdy courser, its coat a muddy bay. "This is what you shall ride until you prove yourself. Keep it alive, keep yourself alive, and we shall see what future you earn." The courser was no destrier, but when Arnaud laid a hand upon its warm neck, he felt the faint tremor of possibility. The path was not closed, it was only longer, steeper, more dangerous. He led the horse away from the market as the sun dipped low, the cries of traders fading behind him. The dream of a destrier still burned in his chest, but now it was tied to another man's banner, another man's fortunes. And for the first time, Arnaud began to wonder whether the true cost of a war horse was not measured in silver or gold, but in the freedom a knight surrendered when he grasped the reins. Hooves in the mud of war. The campaign began with banners unfurling in the spring wind, bright colors snapping above ranks of men who smelled of leather, steel, and old sweat. Arnaud rode among them on the muddy bay courser Lord Giafar had lent him, the horse's ears flicking nervously at the clang of armor. Though the beast lacked the bulk of a destrier, it moved with surprising grace. Its stride was long, its breath steady even after hours on the march. Arnaud grew used to the rhythm of its hooves on the rutted road, the way it shifted beneath him when the wind carried distant horns. He whispered to it often, half to calm the animal, half to calm himself. The company crossed rivers, trudged through forests, and camped in fields where the smell of dung mixed with wood smoke. Each night Arnaud learned more about the burdens of horse ownership, not the grand glory sung by troubadours, but the quiet labor. Grooming the hide until it shone. Checking hooves for stones. Weighing out the oats, always short, always precious. Many a night grumbled louder about fodder than about the enemy. When at last the clash came, it was sudden and brutal. Giaffre's men rode at dawn, spears lowered, into a band of raiders who had torched a village. The courser beneath Arnaud surged forward, muscles rippling, foam flecking its mouth. The earth shook with the thunder of a dozen horses charging in unison. Arnaud's lance struck true, splintering on the shield of a foe. The impact nearly tore him from the saddle, but the courser plunged on, biting at the air, kicking out with hooves that cracked bone. The beast's ferocity startled him. It was as though, in the din of battle, horse and rider merged into one creature, savage and unstoppable. When the skirmish ended, the village smoldered, the raiders lay scattered, and Arnaud sat trembling, his courser's sides heaving beneath him. He stroked its neck with a hand sticky with sweat and blood. "Good lad," he whispered hoarsely. "Good lad." Lord Giaffre rode past, his destrier, a towering white beast, snorting like a dragon. "You kept your seat," the lord called, a rare flicker of approval in his tone. "Perhaps there's hope for you yet." Arnaud felt a surge of pride, though his ribs ached and his purse was no fuller than before. In that moment he understood what the old knight at the market had meant. A war horse was not only bought, it was proven in the storm of combat, where every coin paid was measured against life and death. That night, as he tended the courser by firelight, he thought again of the destrier he had once dreamed of owning. Perhaps, in time, Lord Giaffre would keep his word. But for now, Arnaud was beginning to learn that the true value of a horse was not in its price, but in the bond forged when hoofs pounded mud and men screamed for their lives. The bonds of recovery. The morning after the skirmish dawned gray and wet. Rain fell in steady sheets, turning the trampled earth of the battlefield into a mire where armor rusted and crows gathered in black knots. Arnaud moved quietly among the tents, his body stiff from bruises, his mind still echoing with the clash of steel. Yet it was not his wounds that drew him from sleep, but the restless shifting of his courser. The bay stood tethered near the edge of camp, flanks quivering, a shallow cut tracing the line of its shoulder. Blood had dried in a dark crust where a raider's blade had glanced off. Arnaud pressed his palm gently over the wound, whispering as if the horse might understand. He had seen men lose mounts in their first fight, forced to walk home in shame, armor clattering uselessly on their backs. He would not suffer that fate. From nearby, a grizzled farrier approached, his apron already stained with poultice and ash. "Not bad," the man muttered, kneeling to inspect the courser's legs. "Could have been worse. A clean strike would have gutted him, and you with him. Keep it clean, rub in this salve, and he'll be right as rain." Arnaud nodded, taking the jar the farrier thrust into his hand. The smell of herbs, sharp and bitter, clung to his fingers as he worked it gently into the wound. The courser shifted but did not resist, lowering its head as though in weary trust. Across the camp, the destriers of Lord Giaffre and his senior knights were receiving their own care. Squadrons of grooms brushed mud from their coats, cleaned hooves, and checked tack. These beasts were tended like princes, their worth too great to risk neglect. Arnaud's gaze lingered on them, still half envious, but when he turned back to his own mount, he felt a steadier kind of pride. This courser had carried him through fire. It was not grandeur he saw in its eyes, but loyalty. As the day wore on, he listened to men speak of the cost of such wounds, not in flesh alone, but in silver. A destrier crippled in battle might mean ruin, for no ransom could recover its value. Some knights insured their mounts with oaths sworn to lords, binding themselves to repayment should the beast fall. Others turned to monasteries, pledging gifts of land in return for loans to buy replacements. The truth sank into Arnaud like the rain into soil. The cost of a war horse was never just the price at market. It was the endless toll paid in care, in coin, in debt, and in the silent prayers whispered every time a lance shattered in the charge. That evening, when the fires dimmed and the camp grew still, Arnaud lay awake beside his horse, listening to its slow breathing. He thought of the black destrier in the market, of Lord Giaffre's promise, and of the long road that still stretched before him. For the first time, he understood that a knight's fortune rested on more than the beast beneath him. It rested on whether he could keep it alive, battle after battle, march after march, until both man and horse were forged into something stronger than steel. The splendor of the lists. By summer's height, the campaign quieted. Lord Giaffre's men returned with spoils enough to satisfy their liege, and villages once again echoed with the sound of hammers on anvils instead of war cries. Yet peace did not mean idleness. With no raids to ride against, the knights turned their energies toward the lists, the tournaments where skill, strength, and wealth were put on grand display. Arnaud rode with Giaffre's retinue to Cannes, where banners fluttered from every tower and tents blossomed like bright flowers beyond the city walls. The air thrummed with anticipation. Merchants sold roasted meat and spiced wine, troubadours tuned lutes, and children darted between horses' legs to catch dropped coins. But it was the lists themselves that dazzled Arnaud. The tiltyards stretched long and narrow, flanked by wooden barriers. Knights in gleaming armor paraded their mounts, destriers draped in cloth of gold, coursers in silks, even the occasional palfrey polished up for show. The beasts snorted and pawed, their tack crusted with gems that cost more than a farmer's yearly yield. Lord Giaffre entered the field astride his white destrier, the crowd cheering at the sight. Arnaud followed on his courser, feeling the eyes of spectators skim over him with less interest. He did not mind. For once, he was glad to be half invisible. The trumpet sounded, and the justs began. Lances splintered against shields, the crack of impact like thunder. Horses collided shoulder to shoulder, chests heaving, eyes wide with fury. One destrier reared so high that it toppled backward, crushing its rider beneath iron and bone. A groan rippled through the crowd, not for the knight, but for the horse, whose death meant the loss of a fortune. Arnaud watched, heart pounding, as round after round unfolded. He realized then that tournaments were not just games of valor. They were showcases of wealth. Every destrier in the yard was a declaration: this man can afford power. Victories added glory, but even defeat displayed means. To ride a destrier at all was to say, I belong among lords. Between matches, Arnaud tended Giaffre's beast, stroking its sweat-darkened neck, feeling the heat of its labor. His own courser stood tethered nearby, less adorned, less noticed. Yet when Arnaud pressed his forehead briefly against its brow, he whispered, One day. As dusk fell, prizes were awarded, fine cups of silver, purses heavy with coin, sometimes even a horse itself, offered as the richest reward of all. Arnaud watched the victors ride proudly from the lists, their destriers stepping as though they knew their worth. The crowd slowly dispersed, laughter and song fading into the night. But Arnaud remained in the stables, brushing his courser, thoughts swirling. He had glimpsed the splendor, the prestige, the raw magnetism of those who owned the greatest mounts. And though envy burned in him, so too did determination. For the first time, he did not simply dream of a destrier. He began to plan. The cost of glory. The stables after the tournament were alive with more than the stamping of hooves. They hummed with whispers, laughter, curses, and the faint clink of coins passing hands. Arnaud soon realized the lists were not only a contest of strength and skill, but also a gambling pit that swallowed fortunes whole. He overheard 2 squires counting out winnings behind a haystack. 20 marks on Sir Odin's destrier. One gloated voice hushed. Worth every coin. That beast doesn't spook, not even at a lance to the face. The other chuckled darkly. Tell that to poor Raoul. He staked his purse on that Lombard knight and lost everything. I heard he's selling his armor to pay back the debt. Arnaud's grip tightened on his brush as he worked his courser's coat. He had thought tournaments were a ladder, a way to climb higher. Now he saw how easily they could become a trap. A single loss, a shattered lance, an unseated rider, one mistake, and a knight could tumble not only from the saddle but from his standing entirely. Later that evening, Lord Giaffre himself sat in a pavilion heavy with smoke and wine, his purse fatter than when the day began. He had wagered boldly, and his destrier had carried him to enough victories to fill his coffers. But Arnaud noted the shadows too, knights slumped outside, drunk not on triumph but on despair, their armor pawned, their horses sold to cover debts. One, a lean Gascon knight with hollow cheeks, grasped Arnaud's arm as he passed. His eyes were fever-bright. Be warned, lad. A horse can lift you to the heavens or drag you into the mud. I had a destrier once. Lost it in a single tilt. Sold my lands to buy another, lost that too. Now all I own is this cup. He raised a cracked wooden vessel as though it were a chalice. And even this is borrowed. Arnaud pulled free gently, shaken. He returned to his courser's side, stroking its mane with more gratitude than before. It was not the grand destrier of his dreams, but it had not betrayed him, nor bankrupted him. Still, as he lay awake that night listening to the snores of squires and the shifting of horses, his thoughts gnawed at him. To remain on a courser was to remain half seen, half valued. To rise, he needed a destrier. But to reach for one was to risk everything, the ruin of debt, the loss of freedom, perhaps even the dishonor of begging at another man's table. The moonlight through the stable's slats fell across the courser's flank, and Arnaud whispered, almost to himself, "What is the true cost of glory? Silver? Blood? Or the soul of a man who dares to grasp it?" The horse flicked an ear but gave no answer, only breathed slow and steady, as if urging him to rest. Spoils of battle. Autumn brought war again. Rumors spread that raiders from across the Channel had struck villages along the coast, and Duke William summoned his vassals to ride. Lord Giaffre answered the call with banners high, and Arnaud rode at his side, his courser's hooves churning up the leaf-strewn roads. The march was long, damp with sea winds, but when they reached the coast, the smoke of burning thatch guided them. Raiders fled toward their ships, laden with plunder. Giaffre spurred his destrier forward, rallying his knights to cut them off. The clash came sudden and furious, steel on steel, waves breaking against the shingle as men fought among the tide. Arnaud lowered his lance and felt the courser surge beneath him, driving straight into the chaos. He struck a raider squarely, toppling him into the surf. The courser kicked and bit, as if the spirit of battle had entered its blood. Foam flecked its mouth, its eyes wide but unyielding. Arnaud held his seat, thrusting, parrying, until the raiders broke and scattered. When the din faded, the beach was strewn with bodies and horses. Some ran wild, reins trailing, eyes rolling in terror. Others lay still, blood staining their coats. Among them, tethered to a half-sunken ship, stood a magnificent destrier, tall, black as pitch, its mane whipping in the salt wind. Clearly a prize stolen from some Norman lord. Giaffre noticed it too. He dismounted, seized the reins, and inspected the beast with a practiced eye. "Fine stock," he muttered. "Flemish bred. Worth a fortune." He looked at Arnaud, who sat astride his heaving courser, breathless from the fight. "What say you, lad?" Think you can master such a creature? Arnaud's heart leapt into his throat. This was the chance he had dreamed of, the chance to claim a destrier not by coin, but by valor. Yet he knew the law of spoils. Whatever was captured belonged first to the lord. Giaffre's gaze lingered on him, weighing loyalty against ambition. I would try, my lord, Arnaud said, his voice steady despite the thunder in his chest. If you judge me worthy. Giaffre's lips curved into a thin smile. Worthy must be proven. You'll take him for now. If you can ride him through the campaign and bring him back alive, he's yours. Fail, and he comes to me. Arnaud slid from his courser, legs trembling, and approached the destrier. The beast rolled its eyes and stamped, muscles taut as a bowstring. Its sheer presence was overwhelming, larger, fiercer, more dangerous than any horse he had ever touched. When he reached for the reins, it snapped its teeth with a warning that rattled his nerves. Still, Arnaud held firm, whispering softly, his hand steady despite the beast's fury. At last, with a toss of its head, the destrier allowed him closer. He felt its power thrumming like a storm barely contained. As he mounted, every eye on the shore turned to watch. The saddle rose beneath him, higher, heavier, as though he sat astride destiny itself. The destrier shuddered but did not throw him. Giaffre gave a nod, equal parts approval and challenge. Arnaud knew then that he had won a chance at glory. But he also knew the price had only just begun to be counted. The breaking of thunder. The destrier was no docile farm horse to be bribed with oats, or led by gentle tugs on the rein. It was thunder bottled into muscle and bone, and every step it took reminded Arnaud of the peril he now straddled. When he first tried to guide it back toward camp, the stallion reared high, forelegs lashing the air, nearly unseating him before it came down in a spray of sand. Men laughed, some jeered, others placed wagers on how long the young squire would last. Giaffre said nothing, merely watching with folded arms, his hawk-like eyes searching for weakness. Arnaud grit his teeth and held on, determined not to be thrown, no matter how much his thighs burned or his hands bled from the reins. By nightfall, the beast was tethered near the fires, snorting and stamping as if offended by its captivity. Arnaud stayed close, though his courser whinnied uneasily from a distance. The destrier glared at him, ears pinned back, yet when Arnaud spoke softly, recalling the lullabies his mother once sang while plaiting his hair, the horse's ears twitched, not softened, but listening. Sleep was scarce. Twice the destrier broke free, dragging the stake from the earth, scattering men from the fires. Twice Arnaud chased it down, his body bruised, his pride intact only because he refused to quit. By the third day, he could mount without being bucked off, though sweat streamed down his back from the effort. The others began to take notice. "The lad has iron bones," one knight muttered. "Or he'll be broken clean through by week's end." Lord Giaffre at last spoke, after watching another session where the destrier finally tolerated a slow canter under Arnaud's hand. "You see now, boy, why such horses fetch the ransom of a count. They are no mere beasts. They test the heart of their rider, and only the strongest spirit can match them. Fail, and you die. Master it, and you ride as if on the back of war itself." Arnaud stroked the destrier's neck, feeling its sweat dampen his fingers. "What name, my lord?" he asked quietly. Giaffre tilted his head, considering. "A horse like that names itself. Listen well, and you'll know it." That night, under the waning moon, Arnaud lay awake, the destrier tethered near. When the beast tossed its head and let out a low, rolling snort, Arnaud thought of storms on the horizon, the sound of hoofbeats across the sky. "Tonnerre," he whispered. "Thunder." The horse shifted, as if in recognition, and stamped once upon the earth. Baptism of battle. The summons came at dawn. Scouts had found the raiders regrouping inland, and Giafra meant to crush them before they could vanish into the marshes. The camp stirred with the clatter of armor and the snorts of restless horses. Arnaud stood by Tonnerre, tightening the girth with careful hands, every buckle secured as though his life depended on it, for he knew it did. When the column rode out, Tonnerre moved differently than any horse Arnaud had known. The ground seemed to quake beneath each stride, his muscles coiled springs eager to be unleashed. The destrier's head tossed, foamy saliva flecking the bit, but his legs ate the road with a terrible grace. Even among the lords and their seasoned mounts, Tonnerre drew glances. Some admired. Some envied. A few whispered warnings. By midday, they crested a hill and saw the raiders below, a ragged band with stolen cattle and wagons of loot, moving too slowly to escape. Giafra raised his sword, and the knights fanned into formation, lances leveled. The air thickened with silence, the hush before thunder. Arnaud swallowed hard, gripping his lance. This was no training tilt, no practice charge on straw dummies. These were men with axes, men who would kill him without hesitation. His heart hammered in rhythm with Tonnerre's hooves. The trumpet blared. The lines surged forward. Arnaud felt himself hurled into flight, the wind shrieking past as Tonnerre thundered down the slope. The destrier did not run, he devoured the earth, each stride more furious than the last. The world narrowed to a blur of grass and steel. Arnaud lowered his lance, the ash shaft steady despite the quaking in his arms. The crash was sudden, merciless. His lance struck a raider's shield and shattered with a crack like lightning. The impact nearly tore him from the saddle, but Tonnerre plowed onward, hoofs striking, chest slamming into the fray. Raiders scattered like leaves before a gale, screaming as the knights carved through their ranks. Arnaud drew his sword, clumsy at first, then steadier as Tonnerre bore him like a living fortress. The destrier struck out with hooves, even lunged with bared teeth, trained for war in ways Arnaud had only heard whispered. He realized then why such beasts cost more than farms, more than men's lives. They were not horses, but weapons made of flesh. When the melee ebbed and the last raider fled into the woods, Arnaud sat panting, armor dented, arms trembling, his sword slick with blood. Tonnerre stood steady beneath him, snorting, his black coat streaked with sweat and crimson. Lord Giafra approached, helm tucked under his arm, face stern. "You held your seat," he said. "Few squires manage at their first charge." Arnaud wanted to answer, but only nodded, words lost amid the pounding in his chest. He looked down at Tonnerre, who pawed the earth as if asking for another fight. For the first time, Arnaud understood the true cost of a war horse. It was not coin, nor ransom, nor land, it was the weight of blood, of lives crushed beneath their hooves, of a rider bound to war by the beast he rode. And yet, despite the horror, he felt a fierce, terrifying pride. The price of glory. The campfires burned bright that night, the air heavy with the smell of roasting meat and sweat-stained triumph. The knights laughed loud, their voices rolling like drums, tankards clashing in celebration. Minstrels had not been summoned, yet men sang anyway, their throats hoarse from victory. Arnaud sat apart, polishing his dented helm with a rag that never seemed to clean enough. His hands shook each time he glanced at the steel, where dried blood streaked like rust. He had slain men today. Not straw targets, not shadows in his imagination, men with faces, voices, cries that still echoed in his ears. Tonnerre was tethered nearby, head lowered as he tore hay with great, deliberate pulls. The destrier seemed unbothered, as if trampling raiders had been no more significant than galloping through shallow water. His flank rose and fell steadily, each breath slow, strong, unshaken. "Why so quiet, boy?" Lord Giafra's voice cut through the noise as he approached, goblet in hand. His armor had already been scrubbed, gleaming in the firelight, a picture of triumph. He sat on a log beside Arnaud, his presence a weight. I did not falter, my lord, Arnaud managed, his voice raw. But their eyes, I cannot forget them. Giaffre studied him a long moment, then sipped. Good. Forgetting makes a butcher. Remembering makes a knight. Hold their faces, and pray for them when the priests chant. But do not let it soften your grip, for the next field will be bloodier still. Arnaud looked at Tonnerre, whose black coat gleamed in the fire's glow. And the horse, my lord? He seemed almost eager. Giaffre's lips thinned. Eager, yes. That is the nature of destriers. Bred for fury, trained for carnage. They love the charge as a hound loves the chase. But remember, his fury is yours to guide. Lose command, and he becomes a beast. Keep it, and he makes you more than a man. The words struck deep. Arnaud wondered if he was worthy of the creature tethered beside him, or if he was only borrowing the strength of something greater than himself. Around him, the knights laughed and sang, their glory measured in songs and scars. Yet Arnaud felt the hollowness of it all, a gnawing weight in his chest. Later, when most of the camp had collapsed into drunken slumber, Arnaud rose and went to Tonnerre. He pressed his forehead against the destrier's warm neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath the hide. I named you Thunder, he whispered, voice trembling. But will you always answer to me, or to war alone? The horse gave a low rumble, deep in his chest, and flicked his ears as though acknowledging a truth too vast for words. Arnaud closed his eyes. He knew then that the bond was no simple gift, it was a covenant written in blood. Envy in the ranks. By dawn the camp was stirring again, the wreckage of celebration swept aside by the clamor of squires carrying buckets and knights demanding polish for their battered mail. The air smelled of ash and damp earth, and somewhere a cook was ladling out porridge with more smoke than flavor. Arnaud rose stiffly, his body marked with bruises from the charge, but it was not his soreness that drew eyes. It was Tonnerre. The destrier stood apart from the line of common horses, tall and gleaming as if the dust of battle had chosen not to cling to him. His black mane caught the morning light like raven feathers. Other squires paused in their errands to look, some whispering, others narrowing their eyes. Saints preserve us, that's no boy's mount, muttered one, not quietly enough. More horse than knight, said another. Best be careful, lest the beast eats him. The knights, too, had begun to take notice. When Arnaud led Tonnerre to water, Sir Alaric, a burly veteran with a scar like a white road across his cheek, reined his own steed nearby and studied the pair. His gaze was not friendly. A fine prize you've been handed, Alaric said, voice heavy with scorn. Do you know how many years I fought before I could claim a destrier? And here you are, still smelling of your mother's milk. Arnaud swallowed hard, trying to keep his tone steady. Lord Giaffre entrusted him to me. I will honor that trust. Alaric's lips curled in something between a sneer and a smile. See that you do. A horse like that tempts envy as quick as gold tempts thieves. As the veteran rode away, Arnaud felt the weight of every glance in the camp. Some men measured him with curiosity, others with resentment. No one saw him as merely a squire any longer. Tonnerre had changed that. He was now either a rival or a target. That evening, as the fires lit once more, Giaffre summoned Arnaud to his tent. The canvas walls flickered with lamplight, casting the lord's face in deep shadow. You feel it, don't you? Giaffre said without preamble. Their eyes. Their whispers. You've been raised a rung higher, and every man who's struggled years for what you've been given will weigh you against his own losses. Arnaud bowed his head. I fear they may be right, my lord. I have not yet earned him. Giaffre leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a blade. Then earn him. Not with words, not with fear, but with deeds. Let them see you ride as though thunder itself were your servant. That is how you silence envy, not by begging for understanding, but by proving you are worthy of what they covet. Arnaud felt the truth in those words, heavy and unyielding. When he left the tent, he returned to Tonnerre's side. The destrier stamped once, snorted, and lowered his head toward him. Arnaud placed a hand on the horse's muzzle, steadying both beast and boy alike. In the silence of the camp, he whispered, "Then we shall prove it together." A hand reaches in the dark. The moon was little more than a silver sliver when Arnaud awoke to the sound of hooves scuffing the earth. At first, he thought Tonnerre had shifted in his tether, but the sound was wrong, furtive, dragging. His heart leapt into his throat. Arnaud slipped from his bedroll, swordless but not witless, and crept toward the shadow of the horses. There, outlined by starlight, was a figure, broad-shouldered, cloaked, leading Tonnerre by a rope looped hastily about his proud neck. The destrier tossed his head, resisting, but the man yanked hard, hissing through his teeth. "Easy, beast! You'll fetch me a ransom worth 10 villages." Arnaud's blood ran cold. It was no secret that horse thieves were punished by hanging, but desperation made men bold. He sprang forward, his voice breaking the night. "Unhand him!" The cloaked figure turned, the glint of a dagger in his hand. "Back to your bed, boy, if you value your skin." But Tonnerre needed no rescuing. With a violent rear, the destrier snapped the rope, lashing out with iron-shod hoofs. The thief staggered back, barely avoiding a shattered skull. Arnaud lunged, grappling with the man in the dust. They rolled, fists and knees striking in the dark. The dagger flashed, grazing Arnaud's forearm, but pain only sharpened his fury. "Tonnerre is not yours!" he growled, seizing the thief's wrist and slamming it against the ground until the blade flew free. The destrier, wild-eyed, pawed the earth nearby, as though ready to strike at whoever fell beneath him. Shouts rose from the camp. Men came running with torches, their lights spilling across the scene, Arnaud straddling the thief, holding him pinned, his own arm bleeding, Tonnerre standing like a black mountain behind them. Lord Giaffre himself arrived, half-armored, sword bare. He took one look and snarled, "A thief among us!" His eyes swept Arnaud. "And a squire who guards his charge better than most knights." The thief, revealed now as a low-born mercenary hired for camp labor, was dragged away, cursing. Giaffre placed a firm hand on Arnaud's shoulder. "You have done more than defend a horse. You have defended honor, and that is priceless." Arnaud, breath ragged, turned to Tonnerre. The destrier lowered his head until his dark eyes met the boy's, and for the first time, there was no resistance in them, only recognition. In that moment, Arnaud knew the bond was sealed, not by coin, nor by gift, but by loyalty tested in the night. First ride in the lists. The morning after the attempted theft, the camp stirred with gossip like crows in a field. Every knight, squire, and groom had heard how Arnaud had fought off the would-be thief. Some spoke with admiration, others with envy, and a few with the sharp tongue of resentment. "Luck," one muttered. "Nothing more. The horse did half the work." "Luck or not," another replied, "he guarded a destrier worth more than our lives. That earns him favor." Arnaud tried to ignore them, though the words burrowed beneath his skin. He bound his cut arm in cloth, not wanting the sting of a healer's hands, and went about his chores as if nothing had changed. Yet everything had. Men looked at him differently now, as though the glow of Tonnerre's shadow reached him, too. By noon, Lord Giaffre summoned him. The knight stood in the lists where men trained, the dirt trampled by countless hoofs. Tonnerre was there as well, newly saddled, his black coat oiled to a shine. The destrier pawed impatiently, nostrils flaring, eager for work. "Today," Giaffre said, voice carrying the weight of judgment. You ride him. Arnaud froze. My lord, I am no knight yet. No. But you proved last night that you can guard him. Now prove you can master him. Mount. The squires and knights ringed the lists, whispers rising like wind through trees. Arnaud stepped forward, his legs wooden, his mouth dry. He placed a hand on Tonnerre's neck, feeling the warmth, the silent strength beneath. The destrier turned his great head slightly, and for once did not resist the hand that reached for the reins. The saddle was high, made for war, not ease. With a grunt, Arnaud pulled himself up, settling astride. The world seemed smaller from that height, the camp below like toys. His heart pounded, but his grip held firm. Walk him, Giaffre commanded. Arnaud squeezed his heels gently. Tonnerre moved, each step deliberate, powerful. The ground trembled faintly beneath. Murmurs rose from the crowd. Now trot. The gait quickened, smoother than Arnaud expected, though it jolted his wounded arm. He clenched his teeth and pressed on. Tonnerre obeyed, no wildness in him, no battle madness, only the controlled fire of a destrier listening to his rider. Now charge the quintin! Ahead stood the wooden dummy with its shield and counterweight, used to train knights for jousting. Arnaud's breath caught. He had no lance, only his balance and Tonnerre's will. He tightened his grip, whispered, Forward, thunder! And the destrier exploded into motion. The earth thundered, wind lashed his face, and the watching men cried out as the black war horse bore down upon the target like an arrow loosed. The quintin spun violently as Tonnerre shouldered past it, unshaken. When they halted, dust swirling in their wake, silence fell. Then came applause, shouts, even laughter of approval. Lord Giaffre stepped forward, his face unreadable until it softened into something rare, pride. Remember this, Arnaud. A knight may own a destrier with silver, but only loyalty wins its heart. You are closer to knighthood today than yesterday. Arnaud, still astride Tonnerre, could not speak. He felt the truth of it in every trembling breath, in the rhythm of the great horse beneath him, and in the eyes of men who no longer saw a boy, but the shadow of a knight to come. The seeds of rivalry. The days that followed were brighter for Arnaud, yet also darker. Tonnerre had accepted him, and words spread swiftly. Around the campfires, men told the tale of the squire who had mounted the great destrier and ridden him like a knight born. Some embellished it, claiming he had struck the quintin clean in two, though Arnaud knew he had only brushed it. Tales always grew taller in the mouths of soldiers. But admiration was a coin with two faces, and the other was envy. Squire Etienne, son of a minor lord, had been quick with his tongue since childhood. He spat near Arnaud's feet one morning, sneering. So, the stable boy thinks himself a knight already? Arnaud ignored him, busy with the grooming of Tonnerre, brushing the destrier's glossy flank until it shone like polished obsidian. But Etienne would not be silenced. You ride once, and the camp praises you. Do you think the destrier is yours? Do you think Lord Giaffre favors you over his own blood? Another squire chuckled nervously, eager to see what would come of it. Etienne stepped closer. Know your place, Arnaud. A knight's son is worth more than 10 bastards with borrowed pride. The words stung like whips. Arnaud had no noble father, no claim to lineage. His place had always been the margins, feeding horses, carrying shields, cleaning mud from boots. Only Tonnerre's trust had lifted him higher, and now that trust made him a target. That evening, by the cook fires, older knights whispered among themselves. One of them, a wiry man with a hawk's nose, said, The boy rides well, aye, but envy is a dangerous seed. Let it sprout, and it poisons the whole field. Indeed, Etienne's spite grew. He began to spread rumors, that Arnaud had stumbled upon Tonnerre's favor by chance, that the destrier only tolerated him out of weariness, that Lord Giaffro was blind with sentiment. Some even said Arnaud had bewitched the horse with charms stolen from a hedge witch in the hills. One night, when Arnaud lay awake on his straw pallet, the flap of his tent rustled. A shadow crept inside. He sat up sharply, hard hammering, only to see Etienne standing over him, eyes gleaming with challenge. "You think the destrier yours to ride?" Etienne hissed. "Then tomorrow at dawn we settle it. A test, before the eyes of the squires. If you dare." Arnaud said nothing, though his blood burned. Etienne leaned close, his breath sour with wine. "Tonnerre will know his master. And when he throws you, we'll see how much of a knight you truly are." The challenge hung in the air, heavy as storm clouds. By dawn, the lists would not only hold horses and lances, they would hold the fragile hope of a boy with no name, and the bitter pride of one who feared losing what little nobility he had. The duel at dawn. The sky was pale with the first strokes of dawn when Arnaud stepped into the field. Mist clung to the grass, curling around the boots of the assembled squires like ghostly smoke. Etienne was already there, strutting with the easy arrogance of a lord's son, his hair bound neatly, his tunic freshly pressed. He had even drawn a small crowd, boys eager for blood, eager for spectacle. Tonnerre stood tethered at the edge, ears flicking, muscles shifting beneath his sleek hide. He seemed to sense the tension, pawing the ground with a sharp snort. Etienne raised his voice for all to hear. "We will see who this destrier belongs to. Not with lances, not with swords, but with worth. Let us mount, one after the other. The horse himself shall choose." The squires murmured approval. It was dangerous folly, but the kind that stirred excitement in young blood. Arnaud stepped forward, his heart tight in his chest. He said nothing, but his silence was a blade sharper than any insult. Etienne went first. With a dramatic sweep of his arm, he approached Tonnerre, speaking soft words as though gentling a child. He stroked the destrier's neck, slipped his foot into the stirrup, and swung up into the saddle. For a moment, it seemed Tonnerre would accept him. The horse stood still, tail flicking lazily. Etienne smirked. Then, with no warning, Tonnerre reared. The sudden violence nearly toppled Etienne, who clung desperately to the reins. The destrier twisted, bucking like a tempest unleashed. Etienne's smirk shattered into panic. With a final violent heave, Tonnerre flung him from the saddle, sending him sprawling into the mud. Laughter erupted from the squires, though some quickly smothered it, fearing Etienne's wrath later. Etienne scrambled up, face red with rage and humiliation. "The beast is cursed," he shouted. "No man can ride him." Arnaud stepped forward. The crowd hushed. He placed a hand on Tonnerre's muzzle, whispering quietly, the words not meant for others but for the horse alone. The destrier lowered his head, breath warm against Arnaud's palm. Slowly, carefully, Arnaud mounted. There was no bucking, no rearing. Tonnerre stood tall and steady, as though he had been waiting for this moment. Arnaud guided him into a walk, then a trot, then a smooth canter across the misty field. The boys watched in silence, their breath misting in the cold air. When Arnaud reined Tonnerre back to the center, the destrier stopped obediently, head held high. The contrast was undeniable. Etienne seethed, mud streaking his cheek, his fists clenched. "Trickery!" he spat. "He has bewitched the horse." But no one echoed him. The squires saw what they saw, a boy of no name, riding a horse fit for kings. And in the eyes of the dawn, Arnaud felt something stir inside him, not pride, not yet, but the fragile seed of belonging. The Lord's judgment. Word of the duel spread faster than smoke on the wind. By the time the sun burned the mist away, half the camp knew that Etienne, the favored son of a count, had been tossed into the mud while a nameless squire sat astride the fiercest destrier in the train as if born to it. Lord Giafra heard the tale at breakfast. He listened in silence, breaking bread with slow, deliberate motions, his eyes never lifting from the table. When the messenger finished, the old knight finally spoke. "Bring them both," he said. Etienne and Arnaud stood before him soon after. Etienne's tunic was still stained with mud, though he had scrubbed his face raw to remove the marks of shame. Arnaud kept his eyes lowered, his hands steady at his sides. Giafra regarded them for a long moment. "Pride is a poison," he said at last. "It rots a man's belly until nothing but hunger remains. You," he fixed his gaze on Etienne, "sought to prove your worth through show. The horse rejected you." Etienne flushed, opening his mouth to protest, but Giafra raised a hand. The boy bit his tongue. "And you," Giafra's eyes shifted to Arnaud, "did not seek to prove anything. Yet the horse chose you. That cannot be bought, nor forced. It is a gift and a burden." The camp was silent. Even the hounds seemed to hold their breath. "From this day," Giafra declared, his voice carrying across the gathered men, "the destrier Tonnerre shall be entrusted to Arnaud. He will ride him in training, in march, and in war. If the horse accepts him in battle, then he is no longer a mere squire, but a knight in waiting." A ripple of disbelief ran through the crowd. Etienne's jaw dropped, his face twisting with fury. "My lord, you cannot! He is nothing! A nobody, a whelp with no blood, no!" "Enough!" Giafra thundered. His voice silenced even the crows overhead. "A knight is not made by birth, but by steel, by loyalty, and by the beasts that carry him into hell. The horse has spoken. I will not gainsay it." Etienne's fists trembled. He bit back his words, but his glare at Arnaud was a promise of vengeance. Arnaud, meanwhile, felt his heart hammering in his chest. He bowed low, barely able to breathe. "My lord," he said softly, "I will not fail him. Or you." Giafra's gaze softened for the briefest instant, a flicker like the last coal in a fire. "See that you do not. For the cost of such a horse is dearer than gold, it is your life." Tonnerre snorted nearby, stamping once upon the earth, as if to seal the judgment with his own thunderous accord. The cost in blood. The day of battle came heavy with smoke. Fields once golden with harvest were trampled flat beneath a forest of lances. The clang of harness buckles, the hiss of whetstones over steel, and the muttered prayers of men filled the dawn like a grim litany. Arnaud stood by Tonnerre, fastening the last strap of his war saddle. The destrier was restless, pawing the earth, foam flecking at his bit. He was no longer merely Giafra's beast, he was Arnaud's partner, and both knew it. "Are you ready?" a fellow squire asked, wide-eyed. Arnaud smiled faintly, though his stomach was a knot. "As ready as any man can be to ride into thunder." The horn sounded. Knights mounted, banners shook out, and the ground quaked as the line advanced. Arnaud swung into the saddle, and Tonnerre surged forward with a power that nearly tore the reins from his hands. Together they joined the tide of armored men, the sky filling with the roar of hooves. The enemy line loomed, bristling with spears. Arnaud lowered his lance, heart hammering in rhythm with Tonnerre's strides. For one breathless instant, he saw his life stretched before him, boyhood chores, the sting of Etienne's mockery, the night he had fought for the horse's freedom. All of it had led here, to this charge. Impact came like a storm. Spears shattered, men cried out, iron rang against iron. Tonnerre plowed through the crush like a living mountain, his muscles surging beneath Arnaud as if the two shared one body. Arnaud struck, thrust, and parried, every movement sharpened by the bond of horse and rider. But victory was not free. A spear glanced off Tonnerre's flank, biting deep into flesh. The stallion screamed, staggering, blood streaking his dark coat. Arnaud's vision blurred with fury. He fought harder, shielding his mount, cutting down the foe with desperate precision. At last, the enemy broke. Smoke and dust drifted over the field. Survivors limped back toward camp, dragging the wounded. Arnaud slid from the saddle, dropping to his knees beside Tonnerre. The destrier trembled, breath ragged, but his great dark eyes still burned with fire. "You carried me," Arnaud whispered, pressing his forehead to the horse's neck. "You gave all you had." Lord Giafra rode up, helm under his arm, his face gray with exhaustion but stern as ever. He looked at the wounded horse, then at the blood-smeared boy who refused to let go of the reins. "You asked once, Arnaud, what such a beast costs," Giafra said softly. "Now you know. The coin is not silver nor gold. The cost is paid in flesh, in loyalty, in every heartbeat shared between man and mount." Arnaud nodded, tears blurring his vision. He understood at last. A war horse cost everything. As the sun sank behind the field of broken lances, Arnaud rose with Tonnerre beside him, bloodied but unbroken. Together they walked back toward the camp, shadows stretching long, bound forever by the price they had paid. The true cost of a war horse had been ridden in blood, and in that cost Arnaud had found not loss, but his knighthood.